Welcome back. Okay, so people seem to be very afraid to be wrong nowadays. Um, and I think that has something to do, it's linked to this fear of failure as well, which um, might be something that, um, because I'm actually including myself in this group. Maybe today I'm better off, but I still think that sometimes I have this little fear of being wrong. And sometimes that does a little bit of collateral damage to any conversation, because the way to pattern this behavior is when you talk to someone that has a different way of viewing something. We often want to construct our thought in an absolute way to try to show that person that we're right and they're wrong. But then something funny happens, and is that perhaps the person that is talking has more information than we do about any subject, and when it delivers in a way that make us feel a little bit uncomfortable because we're speechless, because we have nothing to say to that, there is no rebuted argument that can change the way the person just came off with that section. It completely debunks everything that we believed about that matter. So that is very interesting to me. I've been thinking, because this came to my head that I wanted to talk about this on the podcast after having a conversation pretty much about the what happiness really is, and how it's constructed and how it's delivered by the media. And having a conversation with my brother and my mom this morning over breakfast, we were discussing various ways why there's a need to do research on which is the happiest country in the world. And I think one of the things that makes this very controversial is the conflict there is a lot of people confuse happiness with wellness. And looking at those lists, we realize that there is a conflict between a lot of those lists. We're looking at the countries that are way up in wellness because they're governments that actually facilitate life for its citizens in such a way that a lot of people living in those countries lose a little bit, and this is my argument, they lose this sense of urgency of living. At some point, they don't have it anymore. Why? Because they've been handed practically everything, right? So this is a little parenthesis. I lived in Norway for a couple of years. This was back in 2011, 2012. I lived in Norway for 2 years. And back then, I didn't know much about it. It was always a little bit. There was always a little bit of mystery about those Scandinavian countries, and I had interest in their way of life. And one thing I knew, those countries overdeveloped a lot over the past 40, 50 years. They became very rich, but at the same time, unlike most countries, they became overdeveloped as well, in the sense that the government actually works. Those governments, they are almost incorruptible. It's something very interesting. And the way of life there, if of course, if you're a foreigner and you arrive, things tend to be a little bit more difficult. But if you were born in one of those countries, you tend to be inside their systems since your date of birth. So once you start school, you're in the system. Everything is easy. They facilitate a lot of things. So when you become an adult, you're in your 35s, 40s, that sense of urgency goes away. It goes away because you had almost everything handed to you by the system. And this is where this will go to a very dark place very quickly. Because even though everything works and there is barely any corruption, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have failures or cracks and little issues that they need to fix. And one of the issues is the population is losing their will to survive, to live, exactly because they have no more sense of urgency. Once you are provided everything and you realize that you already finished school, you already finished your career if you went to college, you already worked, you already got married, you probably had kids, you divorced, you remarried, you had kids again, you probably traveled a lot, some people even all over the world. It comes a time where you feel like it doesn't matter if the government still throws money at you, you have no purpose. Because in your head, what you're thinking is, what am I going to do? Travel the world again for what, the third time in 5 years? Where am I going to go? Australia? South America? Europe? Already done that. USA? Canada? What's the point? I already been to those places. I already experienced that. What else is there for me to do? And that sense of urgency. And that's why it's funny, because this is also related to the fact that those countries have a very harsh, very difficult climate, especially during winter. And that's also, of course, it's important. It's something that is there. They get extremely depressed because of the weather that is not easy to survive with a weather like that. So you see those lists in any newspaper, or if you Google it, there's a bunch of them from many websites. They're not always very accurate, and I think it's something that is very hard to be accurate with, because we need to understand exactly how to separate wellness from happiness. Because if you look through happiness without the materialistic part of it, Brazil is a country where a lot of people live under very extreme, difficult circumstances. And yet those people have the highest sense of urgency. They are the ones that are looking to fight to live. They literally, and if you ask anybody from that status, someone that comes from nothing, they probably live in the streets under very difficult conditions. You ask them, how was your day? They're probably going to go, oh, it was awesome. Really? But you're living under such hard conditions. Yes, but, for them, having food on the table is a pretty good day. Being able to go to the beach and sell whatever they need to sell to make it through the day and actually bring home something, they're happy with that kind of life. And if you ask them what makes you happy, for them is, oh, anything that gives me a good life. If I have good food, if I have, if I live in a place with a nice weather, probably if I have the beach and, the sun, that's completely insane that they don't give any value to materialistic stuff, And then you have the other side, people who live in places with a more wellness-centric policies, like Scandinavia, right? Like Japan, which today I will argue that it's only a few countries that do that, but still, Switzerland, those countries, the people are not happy. They granted, it seems like they have everything handed to them. But one could argue, if you're not happy with the things that you're actually getting, and you're having the easiest life, because, and this is something else that clicked in my head, is all of those people, if they don't like the weather, if the weather is the sole thing that they hate about their country, they can always move and live somewhere else. It's not like they lack the money for it. They're the ones that can actually make it the easiest in a place where the weather is nicer. But a lot of them don't do that. So that's what I was discussing with my brother, because he thinks that the weather is a big factor, and I think the weather is one of the factors, but also there's a bunch of other things that go with it, right? I think a lot of those people, they're okay traveling, but they don't want to leave their country. There's also the fear of, what am I going to do in another country where I don't know how things work? I know how things work here. I am attached to this system. If I go to another place, I don't know if that's going to be the same. So I stay here. Even though I hate this weather, I hate my life, because nothing makes me happy. And it's very critical, I think, to understand the differences between wellness and happiness, because it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. I think we need to understand the separation of those two. And perhaps we're reaching a point where only living by the materialistic way of life, because we are pressured by so much publicity and so much commercial crap that we don't even realize that most things that we buy today we don't even need. It's not things that we need. We need food, which is one of the things that if we continue living the same way that we lived millions of years ago, we would get food ourselves, so we wouldn't need to be buying food or selling food. We will be hunting, we will be gathering, because that's what we used to do before all of this nonsense of having to live by, buy and sell, to survive. It doesn't make sense. It's too artificial. And that's something else that engrips itself in this line of conversation. What is it that we really need? Why is it that now we have all of this, and I don't want to offend anyone by saying this, but I'm going to put it in context later. Fake mental health issues, because I say fake, okay, not fake, but let's say this new mental health issues are because of all of this insane modern ways of wanting to live. And it came to me that I'm one of those people that I'm in favor. I will be the first in line to actually get a surgery to have the Neuralink chip implanted in my brain. I'm the first one who wants to try that. But at the same time, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, what about all the primal instinctual things that we used to do when we first came out as a species to this world? All of that seems to be disappearing. We still have basic instincts. That's something else that we were talking about. We still breathe. We still eat. Those are just a few of the basic instincts that we have. We have sight. We smell. Those are just the most basic things that we do, right? And back then, we didn't seem to have those very complicated and complex mental health issues. Of course, evolution perhaps plays a part in that. It certainly does. We concern ourselves today with problems that perhaps are not real. We create them because we are starting to lose the sense of urgency to actually do stuff to survive. And we create too much chaos inside of our heads to understand, because we don't want to admit that the way of life that we actually have is actually extremely good. It's not just good, it's way above a lot of people. I'm sitting here and I'm contemplating all of this, and I'm thinking about all the times that I complain and moan about stuff that doesn't really matter. I'm thinking to myself, what a jackass. Right? But at the time that we have those thoughts, we do complain because in our heads, that's a problem. And it's a serious problem. And we don't seem to want to admit that the truth is that's just bullshit. We're creating something that is not there. We want to have a problem that is not there. Because once you lose the sense of urgency to actually want, because sense of urgency is that it's that instinctual part of you that wants to something to be done, and it creates that necessity as well, and it makes you work harder for it. But we live in the state where we're so lazy that we want to complain about things, and we fail to realize that we are way more privileged than we think we are. And it's something to take under consideration and look back and try to understand. There's those Scandinavian countries, especially Norway, there's a record number of suicide. The number of people that commit suicide, it's already those countries are already low in population, and yet they have the highest numbers of suicide. And yet that's the tricky part, right? It's supposed to, they're giving you the easy life. The easy life. And granted, the climate there is not the easiest. Most people hate cold weather and snow every day, but if you don't have at least something to make your life at least a little bit hard, which in this case, that's what the weather does. It makes your life a little bit miserable. If you had everything and it was so perfect, do you really think that you wouldn't have suicidal rates as high as they do? Of course they would. Maybe not as high as they are now because of that, because the weather is a factor. I agree, the weather is a factor, but it would be high nonetheless. You know why? Because anywhere where you lose the sense of urgency and the will to fight for something, and you just decide to complain and cry about it and become completely miserable, then, and in the other hand, you go to those places where the weather is perfect, but everything else is chaotic. I was born in Brazil. And let me tell you, while I lived in a very privileged family, of course I saw things. I saw people in the streets. It's something that is not that hard to find over there. Especially in the big cities. It's easy. Right? And you can see sometimes the way they smile, the way they go about. And with all the hardships that they have in their lives, they're way more happy than anybody in Scandinavia could ever dream of being. And that's astonishing. Because if you ask them, but wouldn't you be better off with more money? And the first reaction they have is, Well, money will help, but I don't know if it will give me happiness. That's the first thing you see. Money helps, but it's not constituent of course, more money will bring me happiness, because once you lose the sense of urgency, trust me, happiness is also not going to be there. It's not. Believe you me, forget about it. And trust me, this is coming from someone. I'm on the other spectrum. I'm on the other side of the wall, because I hate summer. I hate the sun. I love cold weather. I absolutely detest hot weather. I love the snow. I love when it's cold. I love to have to be covered up with a bunch of clothes because it's so cold that I can't feel my feet. I love that feeling. I love when it's dark and rainy. So I'm one of those who would be depressed with a sunny day in the beach. And god damn it, I hate the beach. I absolutely hate the beach. Can't stand that humid, wet, dirty, salty, disgusting. Just, I don't like it. But I understand that most people do. And that's what most people tend to go look for, right? So it makes me think a lot about the sense of urgency and how we behave in, right? We lost a lot of those instinctual things that we used to do. Of course, we now have a higher what's the word that I was looking for? We live longer, right? But at the same time, it's funny because we live longer, but we're not as strong as we used to be. It's funny. We used to hunt and do stuff that was hard. But 30 years old, you are considered a very old person back in those days. So imagine, imagine if we kept that part of us. Even with all of this crazy shit, all of the things that evolution brought to us, the evolution of our intelligence, the way we create things, the way internet, and imagine if even with all of this, we were still living that way. Where would we be? Perhaps sense of urgency wouldn't be a concern, right? Because I think it is now. It's a big concern. We should be concerned with sense of urgency. What are the things that really matter to us? We all seem to be very preoccupied lately with our state of happiness. We can't seem to find it anywhere. It's been hidden for years. And now, I'm sitting here and trying to find a good answer because I'm not saying that I'm the happiest person in the world, but I have to admit that I struggled with a lot of things, but depression is not one of them. I will never feel depressed to the point of feeling that I have to kill myself, right? That I have no other alternative but to do that. For me, that's the last thing. Like I said a few times before, I think that if I go completely insane, which is a possibility, especially for me, before I I ever kill myself, I might kill everybody else around me. That's how, you know, I might fucking get a gun and start shooting everybody before I ever decide to point that gun at myself, because I don't know if I have it in me, because inside of me I still have that part that says I want to live. Fuck everybody, right? But I want to live. Now, of course, I'm not saying this thing about me killing is just, it's just a concept for the conversation. I'm not saying that I'm actually gonna kill everybody, although sometimes the thought comes to mind. And that we need to learn to live with understanding that sometimes our minds take us to dark places and they're not always pleasant. And it's that trick that human mind does with us. Now, I don't know if other species suffer the same thing that we do. I don't know if they have that click. Maybe a few might, but most just have, because they're so attached to instinct, they have that immediate sense of urgency that, if they feel there's any predator around, they just run to live, right? Try to escape death by any means necessary. But in our case, escaping death by any means necessary is becoming something else now. Because just running is not going to do the trick. Because as long as our minds is connected to all of that bullshit, I don't know. It doesn't matter if you run or not. So you need to find anything that gives you sense of urgency. And I'm not saying it's easy, because it never is. Because that's part of us. We tend to make things that are supposed to be easy very complicated and very complex. Just like that. And perhaps maybe this is something where I should have other guests involved in this type of conversation. Perhaps I will in the future. Take a couple of people. Maybe my mom and my brother will participate again. Because all of this is also very interesting. Because it's a way to try to pinch and find what makes us tick. Individually and collectively. Not just, we're all different, but we're the same animal. At the end of the day, we're all the same animal. And it's funny because some of us are predator and prey at the same time. And we tend to be predators and prey of our own, So, what else? Yeah, I think that's it. That's what I had for today. I wanted to bring a little bit of a longer episode, but I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. And once again, to the listeners of the podcast, thank you very, very much. This was episode 26 or 27. I'll check it later because now kind of confused. 26. I think it's episode 26 of My Voice is a Weapon podcast. Again, thank you all very much. The podcast keeps growing every day. I'm hitting almost 200 downloads, which means probably 200 people are listening in. And yeah, I'll be back next time. I will come back with another interesting subject to bring as a tabloid here of discussion. Guys, thank you very, very much, and I'll be here next time. See you soon.